buy some of the most valuable things to me in a way, to make sure that they could not go away. And I started to buy them, and this is an example of one purchase. Different items sold on eBay, but just to give you examples, they all shown as French from Acadian sites, all sold in American dollars, some very expensive. So that bill alone is around $600 American and about around 900 Canadian. So, but that's not all. They learned another trick also. They found artifacts in Acadie, but they were selling them as Revolutionary War artifacts, War of Independence of 1776, because they know that there's a big interest, there's a lot of eager collectors of Revolutionary War artifacts. So even I'm trying to point this. Even if the item is located in Canada, I know the guy that Graves, that's his username on the internet. I know he's from Prince Edward Island, but he was selling these two buckles as if they were from the Revolutionary War. So that's another way to make sure that you will lose the artifacts forever to American collectors and private collectors.
How were you able to know that that was Acadian rather than what he was on?
Well, first the item is in Canada, and I know the guy, Lenny Grace, I know his name because I bought some things previously from him. I knew he's from Prince Edward Island, and that's where he searches. And that's where you find things with metal detectors. But not everything is found with metal detectors. For instance, the portrait shard I showed you cannot find that because it's all metal. You find them accidentally if you have a nail in the ground, you dig for the nail, then you hit the portrait chart. So nothing looks more like a musket ball from Bunker Hill in Boston than a musket ball found in Nova Scotia or Prince Edward Island. So it's easy to sell that as Revolutionary War items. Now I'm going to start it. And one way to remedy that situation was for me to buy some. So I started to buy some. These are the St. Ange portrait that I bought. I told you that this was a sure indicator that this was an Acadian site. So this is just one, and there's another slide of it. So that's more of the same St. Ange portrait. By the way, I'm drinking from this mug, which is an imitation of the St. Ange portrait. I bought it at the gift shop at the Grand Prix historic site. But I must say also that all the artifacts that I collected over the years that I tried to intercept this way, they total about 2,500, and I gave them to the Acadian Museum at the University of Moncton last year. So I made a donation. This is one of the rare and very special item in my collection that I bought. This is called that a Belleisle seal. It's made of lead. And you probably have seen similar things on your electric meter at home with a lead seal, to prevent you from toying with it, from interfering. So that's the same purpose for these seals. They will put that on the merchandise to protect it and to identify it. Where it says Compagnie des Indes written on it. You see when people Compagnie des, oops, on the Compagnie des Indes. That's the company that was founded by Richelieu in 1640. and it was restructured by Colbert in 1664. And there's a National Museum in France of the Compagnie des Indes. In fact, Compagnie des Indes is an imitation of another Compagnie des Indes in England. They had one in the Netherlands. But that one in France, there's a National Museum in France of the Compagnie des Indes, and so I wrote to the curator of the museum, and I heard that Belleisle, and she couldn't believe that I had one because the museum in France, which is the National Museum, only has one. And then I told her that I had 5 of those. So they're now with the University of Moncton. And they're extremely rare. There's none in Quebec, none in other museums in Canada. They're called Belleisle, made of lead. Now I'm going to show you another artifact that I bought this way. And this one is even more rare than the Belleisle. It's the only one known to exist in the world. And I was going to ask you to try to identify it. It took me 4 or 5 years to identify it. I will ask my uncle Guy. Will ask him to not respond because I think I've shown it to him before. So this is it. The size is very small. It's 1.5 inches wide and 2 inches high. What would you do with that if you received this for Christmas? So that's the same view from this side and that side.
Is it to remove your boot?
No, it's very small, it's that big.
Oh.
So that's why I showed the one with the, these are inches.
Is it a camera?
It's about that high, that wide.
Yeah, key holder.
I know what it is. A paperweight.
No, it's too light, it's too small.
Is it a button? Not a button? No, it's the handle.
You know what it is. Okay, I'll let you.
We were stamping, this was red hot, and we were stamping the prisoners.
It's a branding iron for prisoners, for criminals.
Wow. Good.
So I'm going to show you 2 more slides.
Wow.
I think someone takes a picture of it.
So they were branding prisoners, and this was found in Acadie.
Yes.
So these were French. They're Belleisle. I'm thinking that the French were capturing these people, and they were.
It was used. You're stepping ahead because I was going to talk about that. So
Oh, sorry. It's not a question period. I'm sorry.
So on the left is a page from a book published in Quebec about that branding. The other one is published in France, but the author is from Maine. Oops. And this, the author is Catherine Dodge-Rod, who wrote articles on branding in France in the 17th century. And she's a professor at the Bowdoin College in Maine. And she's the one who gave me that engraving. And she gave it to me in very high definition, so you can see more details. So that's there. That's a Spaniard being branded in Toulouse, France in 1638. And he's holding a fleur-de-lis, but since it's very high definition, I took a close-up view of it. See, that's my branding iron. It's the same thing. You see the little handle protruding here? That would fit into that tubular long handle. It's a bit paper, and it's square to prevent it from turning into the handle. So the cross-section is square. So this guy was accused of marqueur de sol, et rayeur de double. Sol is a denomination, a French denomination of money. If you add a special stamp on it, it increases the value, change the value of it. You put a fleur-de-lis or something, and some managed to forge it. He did that, so he was accused of that. The other one is rayeur de double. Double is another denomination. Double tournoi, it's called. And He's accused of rognard, clipping the coins, because in those days, coins were valued by their weights, they had scales, because you could get a coin from Spain and Acadie. It was valued with kind of metal, then you had to weigh it. So they clipped a little piece of it, and with time you could make another coin. The value was diminished, but the guy kept, so it was illegal to do that, to clip coins, so that's what he was accused of. And if you go backward, this guy is holding some radishes or something. He was accused also of stealing rooted vegetables. They say rad, it could be radishes or other things. So he was branded for having stolen. So your question about where it was done in England, it was done in France, in Germany, in the US. In the US you only brand the slaves. But you asked about Quebec, it was done in Quebec. It was still the Kingdom of France, a colony of France. We have many examples in Quebec. We have some examples at the fortress of Louisbourg, which is in Acadie, but it's not Acadie itself, it's a French fortress in Acadie. So it was used there, we know, in 1722 at least. And this mine was found around Beaubassin in the Fort Beauséjour, which is southern New Brunswick, on the border of Nova Scotia. So we're not sure if it was used civilly for the civil population of Beaubassin or in the military context of the fort. So they just tell you the value of types of artifacts that were found this way. And that ended somewhere in the drawer of a private collector somewhere in the state, not knowing what it is for centuries. Nobody could have known about it. So that opens all kinds of research possibilities at the University of Moncton. Was branding used in Acadie? That's a big question. Can we find trace of that? We found some for Quebec, for Louisbourg, but will we be able to find them for Acadie itself? So that's a big. Governor of Acadie came from Quebec, Belleisle, in 1680 something. We think he could be the one right there because it was in use in Quebec. So he was sent from Quebec to become governor of Acadie in Beaubassin. His residence was in Beaubassin, so that could be a possibility. But it opens all kinds of research possibilities. And that's why I gave the collection to the University of Moncton. That will be good for students to research the pottery chart and the 2,500 other items that I gave them. So I tried to beat the grave diggers at the archaeological sites by them. And during my research on Belleisle, I discovered that few of the houses or homestead had been dug or excavated in 1983 by two archaeologists, Dr. Christensen from the Museum of Nova Scotia and Dr. Savoie from the University of St. Anne. So I told my brother one way to stop this racket, at least for those sites in Belleisle, would be to pay for professional archaeological excavation in Belleisle. My brother, who's much richer than me, agreed. So I contacted the Savoie who had participated in 1983 excavation. If you want to resume more excavation in Belleisle, he was happy to do it because he only did two houses. It's hard to make generalization when you have only two examples. If you follow the house on a rich man, you're going to believe that the village was rich, so you need more specimen to be able to make generalization. That's why he was very happy to accept that proposal. So he asked the province of Nova Scotia for permit. And by the way, even if we paid for the excavation, all the finds in the excavation by law belong to the Museum of Nova Scotia. So they all stored in. We got nothing except a few things the archaeologists turned their back, said you can take a brick from the fireplace of the Savoie house, because we think one of the house was a Savoie house, my family, and a slate from in front of the fireplace. So it's not a universal mountain, but legally I was not supposed to do that. But it was a small piece compared to the whole picture. So that's the report that Savoie did, the big report in the Belleisle excavation of 1983. That's the Christensen's report on the same. Savoie specialized mostly on glass and ceramics and these other things. The other one is more general. So these are very good sources. And in 1983, they identified other sites, Acadian sites in Belleisle, because as you know, all the houses were burned down. It's hard today. Some roads were built in farmers farm the land and all this. So it's to find sites that have been untouched or intact. So in 1983, they did identify more sites, and they also identified the location of a windmill. This is I was asking for the position where is Belleisle. Belleisle, it's right here. That's the Fundy up here. That's the Annapolis River. In those days it was called Dauphin River. And the Savoie, the house was somewhere around here. You see the Ghislain Savoie. And this is a map of today, but with the names of the 1907 census. So because the census taker walked from house to house in those days, so we know the order should be the right one. And some old maps show names once in a while, so you just have to fill the gaps. And that's how they determined that this one lives there, and the other one lived there. But it's not absolutely sure. So we dug the house. We think it might be a Savoie location, but we're not sure. There's no proof of that. They destroyed all the property titles because they didn't want the Acadians to come back and have some legal claims. Okay, Port Royal is here. This is the colony, we call it the colony of Port Royal. Port Royal was the capital of Acadie for some time. And then it was displaced because in 1710 the English took over with the Treaty of Utrecht 3 years later, 1713. So they moved the capital elsewhere, but the Canadians stayed there until the deportation. And the Savoie were neighbors to the Ontario for almost 100 years in Belleisle. So they're, and we're going to wait for later to talk about another subject. This is the same aerial photo from 1950s, not by me. So I bought this from the Canadian government. So that's the Annapolis River here. This in the Acadian days they called this piece here rond pré, ou pré rond. In those days, pré was feminine, so they called une pré ronde. But now the English translate that into round hill, and there's absolutely no hill, it's completely flat. I'm going to speak more about that later. This is another view. This is the site where the star is, where the Savoie house, I think, is. This, the red circle there, we bought a old community hall that was abandoned. We refurbished it, and that became the base for the archaeological excavation. And we wanted it to be a museum, but one time we thought of that, and all my artifacts, my thousands of artifacts, would have landed there, but because of health issues, we had to abandon that project, and there's no Acadians living in that area. So it's hard to find people to look after museums or no Acadians. So, but we still own the Belleisle. We have the Association of Savoie. So this is Bill Marsh. That's a section of a larger map by Mitchell, 1773. As I said, see the pattern of the house is very scattered. You don't see other maps where it's very regrouped. Depends of the period. The village contained up to 30 families at a time, because that's a countryside, that's a farm. So this is quite dense anyway for a farm. Belleisle is huge. It's 1,500 acres. 1,500 acres. And that goes down. Here you see dikes, but I'll talk about dikes later. I'll come back to this map later. In here you see the windmill that I mentioned earlier, that the location was identified. That was in '83. But in 2004, when it was time to resume the excavation, they could not find the location of the mill anymore. It had been destroyed by Ducks Unlimited. That didn't do Ducks Unlimited. So their goal in life is to maintain wetlands and for birds. My daughter was very happy because it was for animal cause. She's a lover of animals, but not so happy when she learned that the ultimate goal of Ducks Unlimited is for hunters. So that's Belleisle. That's one of their signs. So this is an aerial photo that I took myself in my brother's plane. And you see that these are ponds made by Ducks Unlimited. See, with a little island in the middle for the ducks to lay eggs and to be safe at night, not to be eaten by foxes. So and the site, you see, I think these are, the archaeologists that work here. See, all surrounded by holes like this that destroyed, and some of the foundations also have been lost because of that. As I said before, all the houses, all the structures have been burned down by the English when they expelled the Acadians. So you cannot expect when you start excavating to find anything organic like paper. You want to find paper, you want to find wood, you want to find leather, boots, because it's organic. The only exception is bones. Sometimes you find bones because they're big, especially those that have been cooked. Not human bones, but the bones of animals. So this is a painting by Claude Picard showing the burning wall of the villages. And this is a foundation that they were digging in 2004, 2005. You see traces of birds material at the base of the rocks. They made foundation with rocks that they took from a mountain. And by the way, this is a box that was delivered to me, one of my purchases. These are bones mainly, but with some Saint Ange pottery. This is an English pottery, the 1600, because they did buy also pottery from New England, from elsewhere. So you are bound to find potteries from multiple places. And was probably found in the dump site of Acadian house or something, because it looks like rubbish together. So I cleaned the bones, is what they look like. And they're so light, they're almost weightless because they've lost all their content there. Phosphorus and everything. There's some seashells. That is with the University of Moncton, and they send some bones that collected at the Belleisle to specialists in Ottawa, because I did work on identifying bones from different animals just by looking at them. And they came up with very interesting results about the Acadians in Belleisle. 97%, they dug to us. In 1 house, 97.something% of the animal bones were farm animals, no wild animals. And the other house was 98.42. So they almost exclusively farm animals. So they were not suffering from starvation or anything, because they would otherwise have to go hunting. So they preferred the farm animal, and they ate very little fish, even though they lived not too far from the sea. And even though more than 100 days per year were meatless days, les jours maigres. So to understand why they would not eat more fish. But we have to remember that the Acadians came from inland. They were not the fishermen. When they came from France, they came from the Poitou-Charentes, which is the interior. They were farmers. Now I'm going to spend a bit more time on where Belleisle is located and why it was quite a challenge for anyone to settle there. These are two maps. This is Champlain 1613 and Châtelet 1719. They're about 100 years apart. But Champlain was a much better cartographer because Nova Scotia looks a lot more like this than like this. But Champlain was absent-minded because he forgot the province. The Prince Edward Island is here. And that's the Via Fundy. First they settled on an island called St. Island between Maine and New Brunswick today. And then after losing 36, I think, or 38, the Acadians who were not Acadians, but the French who died during the winter, they decided that it was not hospitable enough, so they moved across and founded Port-Royal, which was founded before Quebec City, 3 years before Quebec City, in 1605. And what you have to know about this area is that the highest tides in the world are in the Bay of Fundy. So you can imagine the challenge of settling there. That's a better view in St. Croix and Belleisle. This I found in a touristic brochure from New Brunswick. And this is in southern New Brunswick. They call that the rocks, the Bay of Fundy. And just to show you the difference between low and high tide twice a day. Here it's about 20 feet, but the range is between 11 and 55 feet, so it's huge. The Acadians had to build dikes to protect themselves against these enormous tides. It looks very red there, but if you go into Nova Scotia and those areas, you find some red soil that red because of the high content of the iron. So they built dikes, and they built what they call a boiteau, which is a drainage system, but innovative, with a trap, the close at high tide to stop the water from penetrating the land, then open at low tide and free the water from inside. And after it was dry, you had to wait about 2 years before being able to use the land. Because it was salty, they had to wait for rain and snow to wash away the extra salt. But once that was achieved, the land was extremely fertile. those days they speak about the ratio of 50 to 1. That's incredible. And that's for the first years, and then it lowers to about 25 to 1, but still it's very high without fertilizers. Because these are alluvial lands with the high tides pushing back sediments over the years, and sediments coming from down the mountain. So they have a topsoil of about 10 feet deep, 10, 12 feet deep, no rocks. To build the foundations, you have to go to the North Mountain to get the rocks. So these were about the best land, agricultural land in North America. And maybe this is one tacit or untold reason for the expulsion. They wanted to grab that land. In fact, not long after they were expulsed, the planters from New England came and settled those areas. This is another real photo that I took to see the plane was running very fast. So I had them in the center of my graduate. It was going so fast that I almost missed them. This is the team of archaeologists, and this is just to show you the dikes. To get there, it's full of, it's pretty swampy. To get there, you walk up on dikes like this, and then you walk another dike like here, and you get there. These are dikes from the Acadian times, 200 or 300 years ago. That's a trail getting there. You can see very clearly there, but we're walking on a dike, and you see water on the other side. This is an abuato, which is a drainage system of the Acadians found in Grand Pré in 2006. It's made out of a large pine tree, which was squared or hewed on the outside and then hollowed or carved inside with the adze. How do you see that in English? A-D, Z-D. Adze. Well, with that. So these are pictures that I took before it was thrown away. See the mark of the axe on the side to square it. And there's some interesting figures about that. That log, it dates back to it was built in 1686, the abuato. And the tree was 274 years old when it was cut. That means that it started to grow in 1412, so 80 years before Christopher Columbus came over. So it's 602 years old. And it's the oldest timber, wood that has been cut to do something, to build something with. Not to a fallen tree, but it's the oldest timber found in eastern Canada.
What kind of wood did you say?
Pine, white pine. Did I show you the cup?
Can I have it?
You didn't guess what the... So that's a detail of an abuato. Yes, I said it was a flat. You see the notch here. The flat had been installed there. At tide, it would stop water from coming in. It would tide over on one side. Would empty drain the land going to cultivate. So this was a picture. These are our tools from my collection. The first one is an adze. I didn't you say that again? Adze. The other one is a 1600 axe. It's a early 1700 axe. So it's the bigger room, but it's we call it forge welded. So it's not welded with lead. It's just put on the anvil, red hot, and beaten with a hammer, and it fuses together. That's what we call it. Forge welded. So that's pretty old. And that's a froe. That's to split shingles. And I had tools. I had about 200 tools. These are just a selection. These detail of the hazard that we used to carve the big aguato. This is an aguato, a photo of an aguato that was found recently in Belleisle. That it's not the tree, you don't look at the fallen tree here, just look at that part here, that's the exit from the other side of the dike. Belleisle again, so we talk about dikes. So before the dikes were made, all this area would be flooded with water. At high tide, we'd see some little islands there, mounds. That's where houses are built usually. Occasionally built there also mounds. But then they decided to make these dikes, which are these dikes on both sides of the river. And then a perfect dike, another dike here, in case this one breaks, so the houses will not be flooded. This is the windmill, and now that became all of our agricultural land. And by doing it, unlike in other areas of the frontier of settlers where they had to clear the land, and they did not have to do this there because there's no tree here. So they did not interfere with the Indians. Because the Indians, for them it was unusable land, it was marshes, which was flooded twice a day, so they stayed away from that. So he's never really in conflict with Indians because of that, maybe one of the reasons, because they did not interfere with them, they did not. And if you notice, it's made the map was drawn by an Englishman, and he wrote all the names the way it sounded to him. Here you see Drew's village. Drew was actually Mr. Deru, D-E-R-U. So when it's transferred to Drew, some Drews like, so that's why it's written Drew. All the names are in English and we didn't check. Thibodeau village here, T-H-I-B-U-D-O. Leblanc is what's spelled. So this is a picture that I took itself. And what you see here, people ask me what it was, if it's a lake or something, it's the tail of a plane. So, this is where we think the Savoie house is. You see the same ponds that I mentioned before. The Terrier are here, the Blanchard were here, the Godet were here, Village Brun, the Lebrun, those who took the name Lebrun were originally Brun. There's Port Royal. Port Royal is about 10,000 people. You don't see it there. It looks near, but it's about 10 miles from here. See, that's the Annapolis River, and the island is here, is Goat Island, and the fund is beyond that mountain there. So from the Fundy to Belleisle here, it's about 13 miles, but still all the lands were flooded at high tide because the tide went up to 30 miles of that river. These are the highest tides in the world. This is another picture that I took. Now with the years of the digs. 83 were here, A and B were 2 houses. Here it should read 2004 A, B, and C because they actually found 3 houses, plus a barn, plus a well. That's what we think is the Savoie house. And there were 3 houses because some burned at one point in time. The British came up the river once in a while and destroyed some houses, burned some houses. We have a map of 1710 by de la Batte with 5 houses. Then instead again, the next year the map, we see 4 houses because one was burned in an attack in 1710. Now, you see the Acadians were that close to the river, but when the settlers from New England came, the planters and later the loyalists who fled the American Revolution, they didn't know how to deal with the dikes and with the polders and with with the wetlands, so they built much further, much closer to the mountain, and they were, like other settlers elsewhere in North America, they were used to clearing land instead of making dikes, so that's why this is much higher. But here they were forced to settle closer to the river because there's less space. But still, you see very clearly there that they didn't want to stay there. And after the deportation, they hired some Acadians to come back and work because they knew how to deal with dikes. It must have been very frustrating for the Acadians who worked on their own land that they used to own, but now as almost slave laborers for their food.
The shape of the river, is it because they shaped dikes in certain areas so that it meandered that
The
way?
bed was that shape.
Yeah,
What happened also is when they created the dikes, when they made the dikes, there were some islands there that have disappeared today because the flow, the water did not spread all over the field, so it's confined to the banks of the
Yeah,
dikes.
it's not a
So
natural
the flow is much higher, the depth is higher, and the flow is much faster, so that's why the islands disappeared. But that was the bed of the river. At low tide, that's where we look. It's 5 times or lines of this.
I was told that the Martin House was in the Belleisle area. Did you come across that anywhere or that?
It's about here. Are you about there? Are you Martin?
She owns
No,
that.
I know the Martin House.
This was about here. And now it's our rent. We probably could not find the foundation.
Yeah.
And the first Acadian born was born there. Mathieu Martin in 1636. So that's where he was born. There's a word. He said, "That's something." And also,
Oh, yeah, it's really cool in there. Really? Can I look at that?
he said, "Can you please refer to that?" Okay. I showed you reports that of the days of 1983 by Lavoie and Christensen. We're still waiting for the report of the dates of 2045 that we commissioned. It should be reports of this, but instead of reports, so far he produced the articles that were published in the scholarly journal, and the photo that you've seen that I took was used in that book. So that's up there. That's Marc Lavoie who wrote that. That's the archaeologist we are the dates in the lab. Now we're going to look at some of the dates. That's my brother who paid for the excavation over 2 years. And the one with the cat, his t-shirt is Marc Lavoie, the archaeologist. There were 2 or 3 archaeologists in addition, and then the students. Found something? On the screen, tiny particles.
Oh,
That's the 2005T, that one was 2004, that's the 2005T. They do it even when it rains, they have the carpet. That's the Over there is the Savoie house. Everything is the Godet house. The day I was here, they found this part of a hinge from the door. Scissors. This is part of the Belleisle jug made in Germany in the 1600s. Each of them had a design on it that was done by hand, so one is single. That's another one, another design, with another Belleisle jug from Germany. So an old farmer from the place decided that they wanted to mark the place, so he made a sign for us. I mentioned Belleisle that we restored. It was an old community center, 1800s, late 1800s, like these houses. And that's the president of our association, Savoie. And you wouldn't believe who she is. She's the daughter-in-law of the well-known conductor of the Scala of Milan. That's where she lived, and he lived with her when she was here. And she paid a visit to help us fix she didn't really fix the toilet. That was These are two of her children. These are all professionals. You know, that was inauguration. Members of Parliament. It's my brother, that's me. And behind here is Stephen McNeill. He's now the Prime Minister of Nova Scotia. But not because of this. That's me and my brother. And then between us, you read the Sons of Temperance. Don't believe it, everything you read. I'll let you read this. Native rivers. I said that we wanted to turn this into a museum, into an information center, into a genealogy resource center. This is during the 2004 World Acadian Congress. This guy here is a fiddler. He's a specialist of 17th century music. He had a 17th century violin. He did a concert with music of the time. Olivier Gros. That's Marc Lavoie, the archaeologist, giving a lecture on the digs in 2004. And you see part of my collection that was all around the hall. That's a guided tour of the sites. By the way, as you see, the frame here is a buckle from my collection, which is a bit of silver, must have belonged to a VIP in Acadie, of the governor. So these are the types of things also that I found So the question was, it was here. So what did the Belleisle excavation help us to learn about Acadie? So that's what this session is about. I showed you the other map by Mitchell, not the name by Mitchell. This is the map by Belleisle. See this, the houses are grouped together. The other ones, they are all in line. So that one dates from 1710, the other one was 1733. So there was a lot of changes over the years. Then you see a forge is a backstick. That will come later. I'll show you the backstick shop later. Here you see it's Widow, now well spelled, which is a small village. Here it says Moulin à Blé. Blé is a wheat, the old way of spelling wheat, so it's a grist mill. The other one is a moulin à planche, or plank or board, so that's a sawmill. And there's another one here, Acadie et Planches. So there were about 6 or 7 mills in Belleisle in those days, or around Belleisle. People generally think of old-time Acadians as poor peasants, but they really were not that poor. They were not rich if we compare that to what we know today. But in those days, they were pretty well off. In fact, they were probably much better than in France, the peasants in France, or in England, or even in New England. This is from this book by Régis Brun. There's 10 pages of this. These are boats that belong to Acadians. And there's not a government listing when you can go to this. It's something you gather during his life of research. He's the archivist at the University of Moncton. Now he's retired, he's in the 70s. He lists 200 boats that belong to Acadians, and it shows what they carry. That's just 2 pages out of 10. So it was, if you look at this one here, what they carry. Oh, it's too far away. 40,000 feet of boards and some bordage de chaîne. Those are boards that you build the boats with, I guess, a boat made of oak. Pulleys are pulleys, and you are boards. Meules are wheels from Ghislain, some wheels. Skin of Lucildi or green, so on. So that gives you an idea of what they trade. That means they had a lot of surpluses. Here in Madawaska, in this area around Fort Kent or New Brunswick, until the 1940s, we were almost self-sufficient. The farmers were self-sufficient. They would produce almost everything they need. And so they would do their own clothing. They would cut the wood to build their house, to heat the house. Or they would grow what they eat. Even a few things they could not produce are glass and tea and sugar and things like that. But still they had maple sugar. But the things that they could not produce themselves, they had small surpluses from their production, or they, as winter jobs working in the woods, they could get that extra money. So they were almost self-sufficient. Each farm was a self-sufficient cell. But in the old Acadie, they produced a lot of surpluses and they became specialized. Here in around Fort Kent or northern New Brunswick, that only happened in 1940. When farmers produced only milk or only wheat or only potatoes, that's what we call specializing. So kids, even at that time, start to specialize, which is something very unusual for nowadays. So some areas became specialists of wheat, other areas became specialists of cattle raising. I'll return to this. I think I skipped something. That's right. Let's say a few words about what in general they were finding. They were finding pottery. Oh yes, in 1983 and the 2004 and 5 excavation, we found pottery from all over the world, glass from all over the world, found glass from Italy, some crystal. And you have to remember that these are peasant farmers. It's like, and they found even the porcelain from China. To it's like having a silverware in your house, buy silverware, so it's the same.
In the last 2 years, because of the thing that we're doing right now, 2014, the last 3 years, I've been doing a lot of research meetings. And when they were talking about the deportation and before the deportation, a lot of the people at Boston merchants were very upset with that because they were trading with the people, the Acadians, and they would be bringing what you just said there, stuff from China or wherever to get the wood or flour or whatever from them to bring to Boston.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that I
In
found.
1710, the English took over all of Nova Scotia, mainland Nova Scotia, and became English. So trade with the New England increased a lot, but it was forbidden for Acadians to trade with French parts, with the Louisbourg, with Quebec, with the other parts, but they did it a lot. So there was, and the reason I mentioned the 200 ships to show that there was, and they were not fishermen. Very few were fishermen. If you read the content of what they're carrying, it's not fish. So they carry all kinds of other things. So they traded with the Louisbourg. Louisbourg was a fortress, kind of far away. Don't remember. Show it later. Louisbourg was a big fortress in the middle of nowhere. They tried to entice Acadians to settle there, but they went down because the land was not as good, it was rocky. So it's a big fortress with a lot of people and very little in terms of support for food and wood and all this. So that's why the Acadians were able to sell a lot, and they had a big overproduction of wheat and everything. So they were able to fill that market, and that's why they became relatively comfortable and rich for those days. This is an example of a ship driving in Belleisle or in the Port Royal. I had to think about import. I went to question a few things, for instance, this axe with a square hole, and that came much later, that came in the late 1700s. In those days, the axes did not have those holes. But these are details. Oh, and I showed you a veil seal from the Compagnie des Indes. You see one here. Not necessarily Compagnie des Indes, but each company had its own seal. That was a way to protect them, to identify its merchandise. So if you open whatever it is, a parcel of the veil, I have to break the seal. The green part is French. The gray part is English. So after 1710, this whole part became English. That's in Nova Scotia, but that part remained French. That's where Louisbourg was. And there was a lot of trade with this part and a lot with Louisbourg. But to go to Louisbourg, they could cross here the Chignecto Isthmus to Green Bay, Vega, and they would deliver a lot of merchandise to Louisbourg. This is Louisbourg, seen from the sky. It was completely destroyed in 1758. It was rebuilt by the Canadian government between 1963 and until 1983. But they only rebuilt 1/5 of the original size. This was the largest building in America, both North and South America, at that time. That's the fortress. That's the residence of the governor. So there's a chapel in the middle. There was an hospital with 104 beds. In those days, it was quite rare. He had, in addition, some private rooms. So it was a rather large town for those days, and with no supplies from the outside. So that's why the kids made
That's the town?
it's a fifth of its size. Because they rebuilt only 1/5. It was completely destroyed in 1758. That's quite impressive if you have a chance to go visit. So this is about our digs of 2003-2004, an article that was published in the Halifax Journal front page. And it says that Acadians were richer than normally or usually believed. And here they mentioned that the Savoie family, somewhere else, that the Savoie family helped to pay for the excavations. Now this is a Moses de la Dernier is quite a character. He's from Switzerland, but he's a Protestant. He was a Calvinist. So he moved to England in 1740. He stayed there for 10 years. And then he came to live in Acadie among Acadians because he could speak French. He lived in Acadie between 1750 to the deportation. But he was spared the deportation. In fact, he helped the English deport Acadians. He helped them by, for instance, going to Acadian farms, picking the best horses and bringing them to Lawrence. So he was spared the deportation, he stayed there. And then about 30 or 40 years later, an historian wanted to write the history of Nova Scotia, but there were no witnesses of the Acadian period. So they asked Belleisle to write papers of life in Acadie when he was with them. So it was very flattering. He said all kinds of nice things about the Acadians, as you can read and talk. And he said it even was the golden age. Let you read it. You have to remember that he's Protestant, so he doesn't like people to enjoy life too much. You're not born to have fun, you're born to work and earn a place in heaven. So he's critical of the Acadians for that trait of character, because they work half the year and they have fun the rest of the year. But still, he says that they sold great quantities of wheat and cattle, grain and cattle. So that's a witness from those days that says that the Acadians were having fun, having a great time. This is a map of Port Royal, and all the villages, like Quebec, where all the villages are named after saints, here all the villages are named after the first settler who settled there. And the last village up the river is called Paradis d'Est, Paradise on Earth. So that has a lot. That's about their perception. It was not paradise. Objectively, it was not paradise on Earth, but in their perception, it was. So that tells a lot about their feeling of their place. And that probably inspired Claude Picard, who had the Paradis d'Est. So they would build their houses. See, the foundation is made of stone that they would get from this mountain, top of the North Mountain, because there's no stone in that soil, topsoil 10, 12 feet deep. This is the foundation for a bread oven. Like in Quebec or in New England or elsewhere, where the bread oven was distinct from the house, separate from the house, the Acadians built their bread oven against the house, and the access was from inside the house. You did not have to go out. So that was a brilliant invention. See the notch on the tree was the same that you saw on the dike, the real dike. And they would use mortaise, the English name somewhere.
What kind of wells did they dig?
The well did not have to dig very deep because it was marshland before, so they just dug a small depression, and from osmosis or capillarity, it will fill with water. But the water was probably a bit salty because of the area, but still it was drinkable water. We did not have to dig very deep.
What is it?
yes, it was a small cellar under the floor to keep apples and turnips and things like that for the bird. So that drawing was made by the artist of the Museum of Nova Scotia from 1983 digs. There's a few problems with that design, which will be corrected later in another painting. As you see, the garden is surrounded by fences. Like today, it's the animals that are within the fence, and the garden is open. In those days, the garden was behind the fence, and the animals were roam freely around the house. How do you think they milked the cow before it's far away? The idea?
Cow would come.
They tie the calf to a tree, and the calf would cry, and the cow would come to. Maybe you're older than us. That's something you know.
What is there?
Okay, this is a painting that my brother commissioned from Claude Picard. Claude died in September 2012. He finished that just a couple of months before, a few months before. That was his last historic painting. He's well known. His paintings are in museums all over the world, in the US, Canada, and France. And we tried to correct some of the mistakes in the previous house. I'll show you the next. Here you see a woman carrying loaves of bread. And we objected to that. Why?
Because they were doing it from the inside.
I just wanted to check if you were listening. Because I just mentioned that you access the oven from the inside the house. There's no need to walk outside. So Picard corrected that because we objected. Now, the final version, she's opening a big bowl with apples. You see apples there?
Yeah.
There was a visitor from Normandy in 1699 called Zierville who visited Belleisle, and visited Fort Royal. And he said the apples there were better than those in Normandy. Normandy is the place on earth best renowned for its apples. He made the best cider in the world, and so on. So they're very proud of the apples. He said the apples that were better there, he said that they were not grown on grass like in Normandy, so they were the full trees, higher trees. When they've got too big. Oh, here's a detail. Here's a detail that we need to Uncle Guy here. See the woman is squirting milk for the cat. And that idea came from Uncle Guy, who said that he remembered his mother when he was young, squirting some milk to the cat, said goodbye. But we just could not add a cat there and let it go because we had first asked the question, was there domestic cats in Acadie in those days? So to do this painting, we asked some historian, we asked consultants, we had Marc Lavoie, the archaeologist, and we had the curator of the Acadian Museum at the University of Moncton. They all did research to find out if there was a cat. Nobody could find cats nowhere in the literature. Except Marc Lavoie said yes, and they found traces of an ox dating from 16-something, and there were traces of a cat. So from that, we had the blessing of the archaeologist, and we added the cat to please Uncle Guy. So every detail like this is thought of and is discussed. And there's still a few problems with this because he finally did that painting on his own because he provided us with sketches first. But then this one he surprised us. He changed a bit the setting without telling us, and he said it was his final painting. He said he was tired because he had to stop for a bit. He was sick. But that's the windmill. First, it was more the foreground. You will see sketches after it. It was more in the foreground. And it was normal the foreground to see that big. But when you move it back, it was too big for the barn and everything else. Also, there's a small lands And this is supposed to be fall, they're picking apples. So lamps usually come in the spring, but these are details that we call that artistic liberty.
How about that pole there, is that the well?
Yeah, that's the will. They built a structure around that depression. And that's just to raise the bucket instead of having it.
Now they have a 6 foot
And you see again the bread oven. We'll see and because as you know, all the houses, all the structures were burned down, so we don't know how houses were built. We have to guess by looking at what they found in archaeological digs. They see some thatch.
What about the roof? That's a thatch roof?
Thatch roof.
Yeah.
Some were board, some were slate, but few were slate, very few. So the barns, we could not see how they were built because there's none left to see how they were built. So we have to look at other means like other sources, like there's a few paintings of those days done by English artists who followed the army before they burned the villages. And one of them was of Beaubassin, Beau Séjour, the run for Beau Séjour's one, and we noticed that all the barns had called this hip roof with 4 faces, and all the houses had the gable and 2 faces on the roof. So all the houses here had 2 faces, and all the barns had 4 faces. We'll see a painting by Hamilton a bit later on, which shows a few of those, but they
Would you allow me to say a few words about painting?
about what?
About the
Okay,
painting?
go ahead.
Okay, I know the author, Claude Picard, is a good friend of mine. He died a year and a half ago. And we are the same age. And we did a lot of work together in drama and other things. And I bought several pictures of some of the production of him. And I followed him when he did this for about 8 months. I live about just 2 miles away, and I was visiting him, like 10, 12 times maybe. And I could tell you all kinds of details about his research. Something exceptional. Just to give you an example about the cat, as you mentioned, I told him one day, I said, I remember my mother doing that with the cat, so we put one in and we found out there it was okay. Then I said, you need a dog in there, so I brought him a picture of my dog. He said, that won't do because it's too recent. They didn't have this kind of mixture of dogs those days. And any of these group of people with sheep, little children that play and so on, we made small sketches, different sizes, and changing them all the time. And the windmill, he did it, I think, 4 times before finally he said, I'm satisfied with this one. So I think
And we had
it's,
models of the windmills of those days, several, and we thought that
this is his last painting for the Acadian district. He finished that in March. And it was actually shown to a group of people the day of my birthday.
Oh.
It was,
So why the windmill? If the well's over here, is it for
the
water?
windmill is for grain,
Oh.
the flower.
crispy.
Oh, is it like this?
And why is there smoke out of that barn on the left?
C'est à cause qu'il y a une porte dedans.
And I mentioned
You won't make it sit down.
yeah, about the 10 slides earlier, I mentioned that there was a blacksmith before.
Oh,
That's it there, so I see the wheel, and now it's
The windmill would turn,
there's a long handle here. You raise the steps, the base is on the stone, but there's a swivel here, according to the direction of the wind.
Wow.
Looks like a square foot garden. Did you ever hear of square foot gardening?
Yeah, I heard that.
Where they build the squares and they build the different ones each one.
You can rotate your balls.
Yeah.
Now that's a comparison between the houses. I said there were some problems with this house. There's at least two problems. One is the roof, is a curve. You see those curves all along the St. Lawrence River, but the roofs are not made of thatch. The thatching are made of metal, copper or something else.
Yeah.
So the snow would, we build that way, that it's not very good. The snow would pack here and it would drop and destroy the time. So there's no proof that the houses will look like this.
Did they, the people, the Acadians that came, didn't they kind of build the style of the house from where they originated?
Yeah, the early ones in 1630s, but this represents 1690. I'm not sure if and they didn't have the same material in France. They were building more like this, a lot of this, call that half timber, the cob, I think, called in English.
Whatever they could
In
find.
French, we call it colombage et bousillage. So, and there's a drawing of the barn owned by Champlain in 1600, which shows how old exactly this at Cape Tormentine in Quebec. Oh, so that's one problem was the curve here. The other problem was that they built, Acadians usually built, it was found by the curator of the Museum of Mountain, that they built what they call a knee wall, that's the knee here, knee wall, like this here, because you use a lot of storage space. So you see the window is close to the roof. Here we ask Mr. Picard to leave more room because of the knee wall. So all kinds of details like this to try to reflect the best the knowledge of the time today. Maybe in 20 years it will improve, everything's changing. See, I mentioned this already. This is in French called bousillage et colombage. Half timber, then the cob, I think it's called, which is clay with the sand and straw. Which is was found in the picture on the internet in Alsace in France. It's the same idea. You see, they have branches to bind it or mesh together with the mud on top. And there's no windows in barns. We don't know why. It's really dark in there. But none of the drawings we see of barns of those days had windows. So if you didn't put windows. And there's an open space under the bread oven. It was warm, so pigs would go there in the fall to get more warm. It was a storage space that they built under, but the oven is the top one. That's the inside. I told you that you could access the bread oven from inside, so that's the trap to the bread oven. So when you open it, the smoke would go up the chimneys and you smoke the house. And you could use it to bake other things, not beans because they didn't bake beans, but you could use that oven to warm dishes and so on top of the pot hanging. So this is some more St. Ange pottery, like this. Some English, some pottery, some Chinese.
How do they warm up their homes?
And that big fireplace.
That big fireplace?
And the brick that I had, I said I took illegally, come from that wall. And that house is in Belleisle. It's written here, Belleisle towards 1720, this one, done by the artist of the Museum of Nova Scotia. Some garlic and some herbs hanging. See a gun here. Herbs.
And you said the pottery is primarily the green and yellow or...
And they call that apple green. It looks a lot like the Granny Smith. So that's one of the brick that we took in Italy. That I gave to give some more. And they were built. They were made in Port Royal in 1600s. And when you hold the brick, you can see the top because it was even in the bowl, with the board. And underneath, they laid it on the sand bed in the chill to cook it. And you could see the traces of the sand under. That's a slate with ardoirs from the front of the fireplace. And the summer house there too, it's with you someone. So these are the sketches that Mr. Picard did. You see that the mill is in front, some places in the back. But nowhere do you see the river except here. That's only part of the river that you could see on those sketches. But when I showed him a real photo of where you see the river winding, he added that to the picture, the final painting. You see it there, which is the same river.
Looks better with the water.
With the what?
Looks much better with the water.
Nice. We were very pleased with that addition. And here you see the dike that was built with the water. Some complained that or mentioned that it was maybe too small a dike, but you have to remember that this is a secondary dike. The big dike is along the river. This is from the house I showed you, the dike. And also the archaeologist said there were too many people in there, but I said the reason we wanted to have more people is that first, Belleisle was the largest village in the colonial portfolio, and was to reflect that. Second, my ancestor, the first one came, Ghislain Savoie, had a family of 9 children, so a lot of people. And then the Acadians were known to help each other for chores, for instance, at crop time, like this, or to build dikes, or to build houses, as you saw a bit earlier. So that's how we justify so many people, because they would do work together. So there was a lot of discussion on producing. But that helped us also understand how they live. And so that was just to show you the river and the one here. So I mentioned to you that one way to know how the house were built was to look at paintings done by foreigners, because the Acadians had no painters, no artists, so we don't have any idea of how they build the house. But this is the village, I think, of Belleisle, a section of it enlarged by Hamilton, who was following the English troops. And you see the houses all have two faces, but the barns with no windows. And you see the lines of this one here. No windows, but 4 sides in the roof. The barns are like this. That's how we figured out that that was a way to build the buildings. So that's I didn't notice those apple trees when I went the other times, because I was going in the spring. But one day I decided to go in October, September, end of September, and we saw that tree. And there's nobody lived in that area, and about half a mile radius around that area since the Acadians. So we think that maybe these are offspring of the Acadians, and I'm sure that they could do probably genetic analysis to see if they are from France and on. They're very tasty and very good, and of a variety that I don't know. It was October, so they. And this is not the storybook apple, or the one in the Garden of Eden. So we said it was paradise.
Yeah.
If you have questions.
Pictures, there's a couple of frames. Oh, one more, come back. Okay, see, there's a whole bunch of trees together. An apple tree, when it grows,
Oh no, that's not the apple tree. That's the apple tree, that's where,
But you-
that's dogwood.
Okay, but you know, trees, you know, when it gets over 100 years old or whatever, out of the roots there, other trees will go just like that.
Sure, French.
Yeah, so they'll grow it, and these are only 20 years old, 50 years old, but the one that was there before is 150 years old. So it's the same reason, because you take apples from that tree and plant them, and you're not going to get the
No,
same apples.
that's,
But from the roots, it will be the same. That's what they call root stock when you plant apple trees.
and that would not happen on graft, the apples like you had in France, because the root is not the same.
You must have a motive.
Well, some of
Yeah,
them
you mentioned that Acadians
Now I gotta work
built
on my son's abroad.
attics with knee walls. Did they use sheep's knees?
Is that,
Did they use sheep's knees?
what is that?
C'est un bois écailleux. C'est une racine d'arbre.
Oh, yes.
So they
Cool,
square it off.
that they selected that to build ships.
Well, in shipbuilding, they use it inverted. But in house building, they use it the other way. So it's like a 90-degree angle, and it's squared on both ends, and you put one on the floor. Is that, did they use those?
Not that I know of. I think what they did, like here, they built a wall here, they continued to that level. So they built, you mean that this part would be,
That part would be, that's right, it would be supported by ship's knees. It's very popular in Quebec at this time, in that,
I don't know if they use that there. I know it was used for ship also.
Yeah.
Because there were some, in selecting the trees that were going that way. Well, I had another section that I wanted to touch, but it's been wrong. The other section is about when, because I had big arguments with the archaeologists. In their reports, they said that Belleisle was settled in 1878 or 1678 to 1680. I said, no, it's much earlier than that, and I was proven right. I debated them, and I had a list of proofs of that. So it was settled long before 1650, not long, but before 1650. So that's more than a generation earlier than
right,
that.
right, exactly.
Everywhere at the Museum of Nova Scotia, when they refer to Belleisle, they say settled between 1678 and after 1678. It's not,
So they're going to have to change the books.
see, that's one of the proof, the first it was. I took all the censuses of Acadia, the nominal censuses, the ones with names. I put the Savoie in the middle, and I looked who the neighbors were. They follow it. I said the census taker walk up the river, down the river, but sometimes he played dirty tricks. He went across the river back and forth. So he took his canoe, went across, came back. So some are not reliable to exactly where they live, but if you look at 1671 and 1700,
Is it there?
this one here, the orders were the same between 1671 and 1707. You have many neighbors that are the same in the same order. For this to happen, that means if it was not settled in 1671, it was almost impossible that the group of people would move from one area to this area in the same order. So that means they were there already in Belleisle in 1671. And then you have all those people there. You cannot have started in 1671. That's one of the clues they go wrong. And then I have other clues on top of this. That's after the English took over in 1710. The Acadians were still living there, but they were paying rent to the, was a way of saying taxes. So that's the order, and that's in 1734. Savoie is mentioned there, in number 39. Here, in the same neighbors, in 1734. So almost 70 years span, still living as neighbors, Belleisle, Savoie.
So that's an authentic paper from all the way back in
1724. That's the Pax Royal of Nicholas Royal.
That's the original picture.
Yes. But the, it's,
Copy.
A photo of it.
yes.
Yeah, but that's wrong. It's English.
Well, I tell you, next time you go in the spring, you take some shoots of those apple trees. And bring them home and I'll introduce
In the summer.
them. Yeah. Acadian apple.
Yeah, and, they look very, very nice and very good. And I've never seen that advertised in stores.
It looks like a Duchess apple.
We've got new varieties now that in the last couple of years that are maybe look like this, but the traditional apples we have in Macintosh.
They had like, I can't remember how many varieties of apples, there was a lot of them. So if you get a subsidy.
Yes, and they were keen on apples, they would keep them all year. Then their basic food was cabbage. Before potato came on in 1740. The cabbage, they would put fields of cabbage, they would turn them upside down with the root up, let the snow fall, and in the winter they would go and put them in the field and make soup. So that was the brassicas, the kind of brassicas was the main.
Probably not for short shooting. For short shooting.
They were just on
Any more questions?
I'm just going to tell you a joke, but my French, my English not very good. I was not a joke, it's in fact, I was working for a minister called Assenas, who was the minister responsible for culture and religion. The time he was giving a speech in English, he was mispronouncing focus. It sounds like the F word with us at the end. So everybody would start laughing. And one day we received a message from the minister's office, please do not use the word focus in the speeches of the minister. He was speaking in.
When 1915, 1916, he did it because we can have when you go
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'd also like to thank you so much. This was very, very interesting. And I'd also like to thank everybody who helped make this happen. Terry Kelly, who was here, who wrote the press release, Sue Tardy out of the PR office, and my assistant, Anne Chavalin, and everybody else who was a part of this. Thank you so much for coming. If you have more questions, you can ask them to me, and I will send them along to Mrs. Savoie. Thank you so much.